All right, good afternoon, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me out there? Yeah, we are so excited to have this fantastic turnout today. This is a great turnout. My name is Alexi Berlind, and I'm Associate Director, and I run the Fellowship Program at the Human Rights Center here at Berkeley Law. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to the 2024 Human Rights Center Fellowship Conference. The Summer Fellowship Program is the oldest and longest running program at the center, supporting students from departments and schools all across campus, both graduates and undergrads, doing fieldwork locally, nationally, and internationally. We have supported over 400 students working in over 80 countries and territories around the world. If you are a student who's interested in learning more or applying for the 2025 fellowship, there's a QR code right behind me where you can learn more about the application and info sessions that are coming up. And of course, also please come and speak to me or any of these fellows today about the process and or the experience of the program. These students were chosen in a competitive process based on proposals to do human rights projects with partner organizations of their choosing. Our fellows come from departments all over this Berkeley campus, and we also have 3 fellows from partner campuses. This year we have UC Merced and also UC San Diego. Each of these students has received a stipend that allowed them to dedicate their summer to the incredible human rights field work we're going to learn more about today. Over the last 6 months, we at the Human Rights Center have brought these students together with one another and our staff to explore the issues through an interdisciplinary lens and prepare them for their field work. Today, we will hear about each fellow's work over the course of 3 panels. Each panel will have a Q&A session at the end, at which point we welcome audience questions. There will be a coffee break after the second panel and a reception across the hall in the courtyard after the conference concludes. Before we start, I'd like to thank 2 people for their generous sponsorship of this program, Professor Patty Blum and Dr. Thomas White. Thank you both. We would also like to thank Oric, Harrington, and Sutcliffe LLP for their support of the 2024 fellowship cohort. This program is entirely supported by donations to the center and foundation support. Also, last but definitely not least, very special thanks to Maggie Andreessen, Betsy Popkin, Olivia Risk, Annie Chavez, and everyone at the Human Rights Center that made this event possible. Thanks, guys. At this point, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Bhavya Joshi. Yes. Bhavya is a 4th-year Doctor of Public Health candidate at the School of Public Health here at UC Berkeley. When she arrived on campus, she was already an accomplished public health and human rights practitioner with extensive experience in the human rights and humanitarian fields internationally. She has focused through her career on reproductive rights. She was a fellow in this program in 2022 when she worked in Croatia with Ukrainian refugee women seeking access to reproductive care. As an alumna, she has gone on to continue her human rights work, including a trip to Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp just this last summer, where she addressed the issue of access to reproductive health care for South Sudanese women. She is one of many alumni of this program that continue to do impactful and important work, and we're very proud to be part of her story. Please welcome Bhavya Joshi.
Thank you. Am I audible? At the back? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Alexi, for that very warm introduction. I want to extend my gratitude to all present here for taking out the time to be with us today. And many congratulations to the fellows of this year and for all the work that you've done this summer. Your dedication, effort, and commitment to make a positive impact is truly inspiring. I'm deeply honored to be here today, standing before a group of people who, like me, are committed to advancing human rights in a world that is grappling with profound challenges. We gather at a time when the importance of human rights cannot be overstated. As I speak, in many countries, LGBTQI+ individuals are still fighting for recognition and safety. Women are fighting for their bodily autonomy, while governments continue to pass regressive laws that strip away their rights. Conflicts and crises in regions like Ukraine, Sudan, Myanmar, and the Middle East continue to devastate lives, leaving millions displaced, vulnerable, and deprived of basic rights. The surge in forced migration and the treatment of refugees has ignited debates about human dignity and compassion, reminding us that despite the international frameworks in place, far too many are left behind. Their cries unheard by those in power. But in the face of these challenges, we also see remarkable hope and resilience. We see movements that reignites our passion, that remind us that fight for justice is alive and strong. We also see community, reminding us that our work does not exist in a vacuum. In fact, it is more interconnected and intersecting than ever before. As we think through these pressing issues today, from the rights of displaced people to the battle of racial justice, from protecting bodily autonomy to striving to achieve gender equality, I want to share with you 5 reflections on human rights work, drawing from my lessons and drawing from the lessons from my own experience in the last 10 years. Firstly, never forget your why. Before joining the doctoral program at UC Berkeley, I worked in India and South Asia region for 7 years. I worked on development projects on health, education, water, hygiene, sanitation, and nutrition. My work included engaging with stakeholders across the socio-ecological system that spanned from communities at the grassroots level to policymakers at the state and federal level. While working on malnourishment programs for children under 5, often stunted and wasted, I met families who would only eat the free government-provided rice and salt as their meal twice a day. In these adversities, there were families that said, our child has no scope of survival in the malnourishment rehabilitation centers, so might as well give my child's spot to our neighbor's child who might have a shot at survival. I also met physically and emotionally strong women who were pregnant for the 11th time in their marriage of 13 years. And I'm using marriage in congruence with pregnancy here because the context and the culture I'm talking about, women typically do not get pregnant before marriage. And these women still sought family planning services with a hope that this was their last pregnancy. In moments like these, when the work gets hard, and trust me it will, reconnect with your why, the core reason why you got into it. Reconnect with your value system. Reflect on the stories of those whose lives you are helping to change. And remember, in times of adversities, your purpose becomes your greatest strength. Second, embrace the need to adapt and pivot. In my first year at UC Berkeley, I was awarded the Human Rights Center Fellowship. That year, I worked with Ukrainian women refugees to understand their reproductive health needs after forced displacement. While working on this crucial topic, I had to make a quick pivot to a human rights case that was gaining international importance of a woman, Mirela Kaveda, who was denied legal access to abortion in Croatia. Using my international human rights law training, members of my partner organization, RODA, and I co-created communication materials by gathering all relevant information from Mirela about her case and decided to use the United Nations charter-based bodies for advocacy. We sent this report to 4 special procedures: the Special Rapporteur on Health, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, and the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, to hold the state of Croatia accountable. 50 organizations from the consortium in Croatia co-signed the submission. We interviewed in public, we participated in primetime TV debates, and did a press release on the World Safe Abortion Day. These charter-based bodies then sent communication back to the Croatian government, asking them to submit a report about their reproductive health rights status in the country. This pivot from refugee health work to abortion advocacy resulted in elevating the local momentum to build global advocacy efforts. And during this experience, I learned to pivot is to embrace change that transforms challenges into drivers of progress. Third, community is the expert. In human rights work, it is crucial that we move away from elitist practices of traditional research. It is important to understand that expertise does not come from the outside, but rather exists within the communities. The people directly affected by the issues we seek to address are not just beneficiaries. They are the ones who hold the deepest knowledge about what their needs are, the strengths are, and what the solutions are. This shift in my approach was a key learning moment in my doctoral research journey. As an extension of my human rights fellowship, my doctoral research was with refugee populations in Kakuma, Kenya. The objective was to understand the impacts of compounded crisis, which is the interaction of two or more events of crisis happening simultaneously and impacting populations simultaneously. So for example, it could be a public health crisis like a pandemic intersecting with an environmental crisis like drought and economic crisis. We use community-based participatory research approach to engage the local communities in Kakuma and Kalaboyei, Kenya. Refugee women from the community led the data collection, and various local stakeholders participated at different stages of the study design to align my research with their health needs to then create sustainable impact. The questions asked by the enumerators during training sessions guided the fieldwork, and solutions provided by the community during stakeholder consultations were nuanced, innovative, and grounded in the realities of the lived experiences of these refugee women. So during my time in Kakuma, I understood that communities truly are the drivers of change, agents to dismantle the status quo, are continually shaping the social fabric and defining the public in public health. Their position, roles, and behaviors should form the core of public health discourse. Fourth, initiation matters. Human rights movements globally are grounded in someone's will to act, initiate, and to turn intention into action. When I initially proposed the scope of what I was intending to do for my doctoral research, I received feedback that the scope is too wide, it may not be feasible, and it's too much for an independent student, doctoral student, to carry out. To add to this, I hit several burdens like denied travel permissions. Because of the initial momentum and with the support I had built around me from organizations on campus like the Human Rights Center, the Bixby Center, and local partners that were energized and resonated with my research questions, we were able to successfully implement all components of the planned research study and get reassurance from the community about the work. A refugee woman from South Sudan thanked the enumerator for speaking to her about her reproductive health experience. She said, and I quote, "I have been waiting for the last 3 years for someone to come and listen to me about my reproductive health. Today, you have lifted the burden I lived with for the last 3 years." What excites me the most is that I was able to foster relationships within the community with my team of enumerators and local organizations in a way that built trust and allyship. We are continuing to find ways to sustain collaborations with our partners in Kakuma. Initiation also extends to staying connected with this community, your fellow fellows, with the Human Rights Center, with the human rights workers and defenders in this room, and people and organizations you worked with in the places that you did your summer work and research. You never know the various ways in which people in community aids one progress. So you don't stop at research. You find entities to align with and build sustainable outcomes for the communities you are passionate to work for. In my experience, initiation has been a catalyst for action. It has sustained momentum and helped forge lasting connections with and within the communities. Lastly, we need you. This summer, some of you might have had a great experience with this fellowship, some probably a disheartening one. Some of you would have felt overwhelmed with returning on the field, and some must have been shocked or maybe surprised to find out the ground realities. But most of us at some point must have felt like an imposter. When I face doubt, I remind myself that the challenges we face are far too many to be tackled by a few individuals or a few organizations. Whether you're working on the front line with communities or advocating for policy change, your contribution matters. In the fight for upholding human rights, every voice, every action, and every individual are invaluable. So believe in yourself, take care of yourself, and remember that no matter what your contribution, we need you. As a human rights advocate, my hope is that together we can continue to advocate for a world where human rights are upheld, not just in theory, but also in practice, for everyone, everywhere. Thank you for your commitment, for being here, and for all that you do to ensure a more just and equitable future. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Bhavya. That was really inspiring. At this point, I'd like to invite up the fellows for the first panel. Please come on up. The first panel today is entitled Global Displacement, Navigating Violence, Family, and Legal Rights. Featured on today's panel are Ash Cornejo, who's a PhD student in the Psychological and Medical Anthropology program at UC San Diego, Dr. Noreen Mirza George, who is an ophthalmologist and a Master's of Public Health student at the School of Public Health here at UC Berkeley, Joy Omesa, who's a PhD student in the Interdisciplinary Humanities program at UC Merced, and Janae Carpenter, who is, as we speak, joining us on Zoom, who's a PhD student in the Department of Sociology at UC Berkeley. Please welcome our first panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ash Cornejo. I'm a psychological and medical anthropology PhD student at UC San Diego. And today I'll be talking about family reunification on the US-Mexico border. On May 7th, 2018, the Department of Justice announced a new immigration enforcement policy called Zero Tolerance. This policy criminalized anyone who crossed the border without permission, including asylum seekers, who were then imprisoned by the Department of Justice. Any accompanying children under the age of 18 were shipped to shelters and foster homes, hundreds or thousands of miles from their parents. Upon separation, a child was rendered unaccompanied, as though they had arrived at the border without a parent or legal guardian. Under the Trump administration, about 5,000 children were separated from their parents, and at least 1,000 of these parents were forcibly deported from the US without their minor children. The universal right to family unity was not appropriately considered in zero tolerance policy enforcement. The decision to separate children from their parents was sometimes made based on the availability of beds in a particular detention center, and children as young as 8 months old were forcibly taken from their parents, often without warning. Parents were sometimes woken from sleep as their child was physically torn from them, with no information for reunification provided. These policies violated basic principles of human rights and international law. This summer, I had the privilege of working with Al Otro Lado, the primary nonprofit organization representing and reunifying parents who were separated from their children during the Trump administration. Al Otro Lado staff have traveled throughout Central America and Mexico to find separated parents and work to reunify them with their children. They have reunified 94 families and are currently working to reunify dozens more. I spent the summer learning more about and documenting Al Otro Lado's family reunification efforts with the goal of creating a comprehensive document outlining the work that they have done, are doing, and their hopes and goals for the future. This document, or white paper, can be shared with potential donors, media, and other researchers. Al Otro Lado is on the ground, working directly with families, arranging reunification logistics like airline tickets and fingerprinting appointments. One thing that staff repeatedly told me they did not have the capacity to do was comprehensively compile the details of their reunification work. The wins, the struggles and losses, what still needs to be addressed. With hundreds of deported parents still waiting to be reunited and family separations continuing to occur at the border, Al Otro Lado staff is in a constant state of motion. So what I was able to offer as an anthropologist was participant observation. I shadowed the staff, observed their work, interviewed them. I attended their meetings and analyzed their data and other records. And this allowed me to create that white paper for them, a tangible product that has the power to garner funds and awareness. One of the first stories that I heard about family separation was of Angel, age 6, who was separated from his father, Jose. Jose remembers telling Customs and Border Patrol agents, "You'll have to kill me first," when they tried to take Angel from his arms. It took multiple agents to restrain Jose as Angel was taken from the room. Jose was deported without Angel back to Honduras, the country he had fled due to gang violence. Jose and Angel had traveled together from Honduras to pave the way for the rest of their family, wife Ana and daughter Ximena. Honduras had become unsafe for them after gang violence resulted in the death of Jose's brother-in-law. For the family's safety, he and his young son fled with the goal of bringing Ana and Ximena soon. Al Otro Lado works closely with the ACLU and President Biden's Family Reunification Task Force to advocate for the rights of deported parents and their children. And they also monitor continued family separations at the US-Mexico border. While separating minor children from their legally documented mother or father is much less common now, it does still happen at an alarming rate. What is more common is the separation of those deemed family groups instead of family units. A grandmother traveling with her grandchild, for example. Even with proper guardianship documentation, separations of this type are very common. Families are often separated at the open-air detention sites, detention camps run by Customs and Border Patrol in the deserts of San Diego County, where asylum seekers are required to wait for days or weeks to be processed by the agency. Temperatures fluctuate from freezing to over 120 degrees, and Customs and Border Patrol does not provide shelter or food. These photos are from 3 of the open-air detention sites in San Diego. The right photo is of a shade shelter, that would be on your right, a shade shelter built by Al Otro Lado staff. And this was days before a monsoon swept through this low desert area. It was the only shelter. The bottom center photo shows a wristband issued to asylum seekers by Customs and Border Patrol. If they leave...
Hi, is this the Zoom link for the law meeting?
It is, but we can't hear anything. The thing is muted. I've tried to email them, but...
Okie doke, thank you.
No worries.
We'll get it figured out.
All right. So again, this photo here on the right shows a shade shelter built by Al Otro Lado staff days before a monsoon swept through the desert area. And again, it was the only shelter during the monsoon. The bottom center photo shows a wristband issued to asylum seekers by Customs and Border Patrol. If they leave the site, they are arrested and deported. So in these dangerous conditions and circumstances, it is not uncommon for men to leave the families that they have traveled with to attempt to find food or medicine or warm clothing. And this can result in separation and deportation. This is just one of the ways in which family unit separations continue. Nearly 1 year after Jose and Angel were separated at the border, Al Otro Lado organized to bring back to the US the very first group of deported parents to attempt to reunite them with their children. Jose, Ana, and Ximena traveled for weeks from Honduras to the port of entry in Mexicali, where they were met by Al Otro Lado staff and 28 other parents who were returning for the first time since having their children taken from them to the country that stole them. With Al Otro Lado's help, every one of these parents was reunited with their children, including Jose and Angel, pictured here. The ACLU took note of Al Otro Lado's success at the port of entry and started officially bringing back deported parents. Today, there are over 1,000 known children still waiting to be reunited. Al Otro Lado has reunited nearly 100 families, and Jose, Angel, Ana, and Ximena were one of the first. So I'm sure you're wondering what can be done. Well, asylum advocates roundly agree on the following demands. Customs and Border Patrol should agree on and publicly share a definition of family group and create a processing policy for this group so that enforcement is not arbitrary. Customs and Border Patrol should externally be audited to ensure proper policy enforcement, and the open-air detention centers must be shut down. There are also things that you can do. You can volunteer with organizations like Al Otro Lado, Haitian Bridge Alliance, and No Mas Muertes. You can write to your elected leaders. And of course, you can tell your family and friends about the importance of family reunification. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Noreen Mirza George. I am a second-year Master of Public Health student at UC Berkeley, and I'm also a pediatric ophthalmologist practicing here in the Bay Area since 2010. Today, I will be discussing my experience working in Jerash, Jordan this past summer with victims of gender-based violence amongst a largely refugee population. So before I get into the details of my fellowship project, let me start with the story of a woman that I met a few months back in Jordan. So Fadwa was a mother of 3 when the war in Syria uprooted her life. Her family once thrived in the bustling city of Aleppo, where her children attended school and her husband ran a small grocery store. But as bombs tore through her neighborhood, an airstrike took her husband, and the safety of Fadwa and her children was no longer guaranteed. And so she decided to make the difficult decision to flee, joining thousands of Syrians crossing into Jordan in search of refuge. The journey was fraught with danger, and along the way, Fadwa faced the unthinkable. A group of men, taking advantage of the chaos, targeted her, and she became the victim of sexual violence. The assault left her physically scarred, but the emotional wounds were far, far deeper. And the shame, fear, and guilt that she carried weighed heavily on her as she reached Jordan and attempted to build a life with herself and her children, for herself and her children. Her dignity shattered, Fadwa desperately wanted to overcome the anxiety and the PTSD that haunted her, but she had no idea where to turn. So backing up a little bit, the Syrian civil war, which began in 2010, displaced millions of people, with many seeking refuge in neighboring countries like Jordan. And these refugees face challenges like limited access to basic services and harsh living conditions, often relying on NGOs for essentials like food, shelter, healthcare, education, and income support. Unfortunately, gender-based violence is widespread amongst these refugee communities, especially affecting women due to a lack of protection, unsafe access to services, and overcrowded and insecure living conditions. In addition to sexual violence, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and early marriage are common, worsened by financial instability and adjustment difficulties. And the impact of GBV extends beyond the immediate trauma. GBV, or gender-based violence, leads to long-term mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and PTSD, along with physical ailments. Cultural stigma, limited education, and normalization of violence against women prevents many women from understanding what GBV is and seeking help, and this leaves them isolated. So this summer I worked with OSAM USA. It's a nonprofit founded in 2012 in response to the Syrian war, and they provide humanitarian aid in Syria, Turkey, and Jordan, and recently they've extended their services to Gaza as well. OSAM specializes in mental health and psychosocial services, or MHPSS, for war-related trauma. In Jordan, OSAM offers counseling, trauma therapy, and mental health education to refugees, especially women who have been affected by GBV. Partnering with Johud, which is a Jordanian development organization, OSAM delivers mental health services through Jordan's development centers, which are scattered throughout the country, which also provide healthcare, education, and vocational support to refugees and Jordanian citizens. So my work with OSAM this summer had 3 key objectives. So one was to collect data to assess the prevalence of gender-based violence amongst women visiting the Johud Center in Jerash, while also looking at the subtypes of gender-based violence that they face and identifying potential risk factors and looking at demographics. Number 2, to assist in the development and implementation of educational workshops on GBV for women who had either experienced or were currently facing gender-based violence. And 3, to engage in focus groups with the participants of the awareness session, as well as the OSAM staff, to identify gaps in the mental health services and learn what barriers these women face to accessing care. So what did I find? According to Johud data, 960 women ages 18 to 65 sought services at the Jerash Center in 2022 and 2023, with 186, or almost 20%, reporting gender-based violence. The most common forms were psychological abuse, which includes emotional and verbal mistreatment and restrictions on freedom, where these women were prevented from working, from attending school, and even just leaving the house unattended. Financial abuse, where women had no control over their resources, was also widespread. Physical and sexual violence were less frequently reported, and while not separately classified, many women mentioned being married in their mid-teens or even in their early teens, often to protect their honor or by placing them under a husband's safeguard. Child marriage is recognized as gender-based violence by the United Nations and by most country governments. So the GBV awareness sessions were held 3 days a week throughout the summer. In the first session, participants learned about the definition, types, causes, and examples of GBV. The second session addressed the physical and mental health consequences, and the third focused on prevention, coping strategies, and available mental health, protective, and legal services. Pre- and post-tests revealed a significant increase in the women's understanding of GBV. Monthly focus groups revealed that worsening financial, social, and environmental conditions were seen by the women participants as escalating GBV, and they believed that better conditions would reduce violence from the men in their lives. Women cited long waits for counseling, limited psychiatric access, and transport challenges to the Johud centers. They were very concerned about the lack of community awareness about GBV. OSAM's mental health staff shared concerns about severe funding and staffing shortages, especially psychiatrists, leading to long hours and physical and mental burnout amongst the remaining staff. They called for more local capacity building and better access to medications. And additionally, coordinating long-term care with other NGOs proved difficult, as there was no established or robust referral system, and often this led to delays when the other NGOs were at capacity. So based on these discussions with the women in the focus groups and the OSAM staff as well, our team recommends GBV awareness. So we have to educate the community, especially men, on what constitutes GBV. Workshops and support groups led by locally trained healthcare workers should focus on culturally relevant strategies to reduce stigma and to increase outreach. Capacity building. We must train local healthcare workers and primary care providers in trauma-informed care and mental health first aid. This will reduce reliance on professionals traveling from far-off places, or Amman, other countries even, and integrate mental health services into the routine care in Jerash. 3, we have to improve coordination, strengthen collaboration between NGOs and CBOs to streamline services and reduce duplication, which is inefficiency. Centralized centers offering comprehensive support, counseling, housing, medical care, and legal aid are essential for these survivors. And of course, increased funding is always a goal for more personnel, for better programming, and also for medications. So back to Fadwa. She found solace in OSAM support groups and mental health services. At the center, she began to heal and to rebuild her self-worth through counseling and shared experiences with other survivors. Together, they discovered strength, they learned coping strategies, and identified ways to seek help and escape harmful situations. So though Fadwa still dreams of Syria, her future is no longer identified by her past. She now advocates for women's rights in her community, empowering others to speak out against GBV, and her story embodies resilience and hope. Thank you.
Imagine you just got a new job, maybe in a new field. What do you think you would need to find your footing? Now imagine you just got into a new city. What do you think you would need to really get settled? Now imagine it's not, let's assume it's not a new job, it's not a new city, but a new country and probably a new continent. And then you have to, maybe you left your family, you left your job, you left your possessions, and maybe you even lost your loved ones, and then you have to start life all over again. What do you think you need to rebuild your life? My name is Joy Omeza, and I'm a second-year PhD student from UC Merced. And as an international student coming all the way from Nigeria for my PhD here, I had some struggles actually getting settled into the US. And I began thinking, if I came here as an international student for a specific purpose, for educational purpose, how much more people who are actually fleeing conflict, people who are vulnerable, people who are going through traumatic experiences, and they're just here, and they've left their homes, they left their positions, and everything like that. And I was wondering, so what could be their experience? How is resettling like for them? And that actually motivated me to carry out my research with International Rescue Committee at the Central Valley, from crisis to community, a collective approach to refugee support. The journey to resettlement is complex and filled with several challenges. Refugees often endure traumatic experiences, including violence, loss of loved ones, and the upheaval of their mental health and sense of identity as they seek safety and stability in their new environments. So they need far more than just time to feel settled. They need support to survive and resources to rebuild their lives in a new place. And this is where organizations like the International Rescue Committee step in. The International Rescue Committee is a non-governmental organization that focuses on helping the victims of humanitarian crisis rebuild their lives. They offer emergency relief, resettlement assistance, and integration services, thereby addressing the multifaceted challenges faced by displaced individuals and fostering their successful transition from harm to home. Now, what is the focus of my presentation? So during my field work with IRC, I worked with the Resettlement and Placement Department. I also worked with the VESU department, Vocational English as a Second Language. And with my experience with them, I learned a lot, and the purpose of my presentation is to share the basic lesson I learned, which is the critical importance of community support in refugee resettlement and integration. I'm going to do this by telling you two stories. And the first story is the story of an Afghan family. So we had an open house in IRC, and I met this Afghan family, a man, his wife, and 3 children, a family of 5. And the man was sharing his story, and he told us how he fled from Afghanistan and how he had to leave his job, leave everything to the US. As I got listening to him, I discovered that his success story was very rapid. How do I mean? He's got a good job now. His wife has started her business, and the children are enrolled in school, doing very well. On investigating further, I discovered that the secret of his success is actually the collective support he received. So IRC has this program called the Co-Sponsorship Program. And the idea of this program is that 6 individuals from the community come together to support one refugee family for a period of 6 months. So he was privileged to receive the support from the community, and his success was very, very clear and obvious. I would also talk about the challenges in landlord engagement. in my experience with IRC, I discovered that there is a major issue of IRC sustaining its relationship with landlords and property owners. How do I mean? Sometimes the refugees have challenges, especially due to their cultural backgrounds and trying to integrate into the society. And these challenges oftentimes, cause landlords to feel like they do not want to receive more refugees. As I began to ponder on this, I asked myself some questions. I wondered, what if these refugees had, mentors from the community? What if they had friends? What if they had more understanding neighbors? All these would be cured. All these would be solved if this is put in place. And the second story to buttress my point is the story of Ben. I also met Ben in the open house event at IRC, but Ben is not a refugee. Ben is actually a community member. As I was having a conversation with Ben, I discovered that Ben is actually one of the co-sponsors for the refugee families. So, but one thing unique about Ben is that he does not just stop in his co-sponsorship responsibilities. He goes far and beyond, even beyond the 6 months, to offer support to refugee families. He hosts dinners for refugee families. His wife welcomes them. They cook their cultural meal. He organizes English classes, driving lessons. I was so impressed by his impactful work. And I think the society needs more of Bens, around. And it's very important to know that you might not be a Ben, but there are several ways you could actually support refugee resettlement and integration. Educational institutions can actually focus on Scholars at Risk program, investing in Scholars at Risk program, a program that helps displaced scholars around the world to find their bearing. Property owners could also be more lenient with their terms of service. Imagine a landlord requesting for credit scores or 2 months deposits from refugees. If property owners could be more lenient with their terms of service, then it will make finding housing easier for refugees. We also have employers. Employers could partner with resettlement agencies to ensure that they are able to recruit more of refugees into their organizations. Students and community members could also volunteer with refugee resettlement agencies to ensure that they can provide practical support to refugees. And then individuals, you and I, we all have a part to play. We can actually be more patient with them, and we can also support their businesses, because many of them are really thriving and contributing to the economy. Another crucial thing I discovered is that the community support is so important, but without awareness, there might not be enough community support. The cruciality of awareness. Communities cannot support refugees if they are not aware of their plight. And misinformation about refugees breeds misunderstanding. There's several misinformation about refugees. Some feel they're coming, to the country to get a better life, but they're actually fleeing for their lives, to protect their lives. And then also, some people, contrary to public opinions that refugees do not want to work, they actually want to work. I've worked alongside them, I've worked with them, and I know they are eager to work and contribute to the economy. Awareness leads to action, more community support, more empathy, and more effective integration. And as a result of this, my recognition of the need for community support and adequate awareness, I am planning a program at UC Merced on bridging the gap between academia and community refugee advocacy. This initiative seeks to integrate the scholarly expertise of academic researchers and the practical effort of refugee support organizations to create a more cohesive and effective support system for refugees. The program will also mark the inception of a refugee volunteer organization at UC Merced. This is to ensure that we create a sustainable support network for refugees, and also that we enrich the academic experience of students as they get to help these refugees. As I conclude, I would say that refugee resettlement, I have come to discover, is not just about policies, it's not just about numbers, it is about community. You and I, we have a part to play to ensure that we create a welcoming environment for the refugees, to ensure they have a good integrating experience. Thank you.
let's go to questions with the audience. I see one now. Folks, if you have a question, please make sure to raise your hand and keep it up because sometimes I cannot find people in the audience, but I can find this one.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much for the presentations. Those were really inspiring. So I really appreciate all of your work. My question is about, you know, as Bhavya said in her keynote, like community is the expert. And so my question is, how do you gain trust with the organizations and people you're working with when you're not maybe from that particular community, and when you're dealing with sensitive topics like family reunification or gender-based violence and all the things that you've spoken about today? And this can be for any panelist that wants to take it.
Into these communities, you'll never know as much and have as much insight as the people that actually live there. And so coming in with that kind of you know, attitude that you want to learn and you're there to learn as much as you are to try to, you know, kind of work with the local community to try to figure out how to best serve the community, I think is the most important thing. And then if they see you coming in with that type of an attitude, I think you can have these difficult conversations and, you know, really get to the crux of the problem.
Yeah,
Also, okay.
Please, go ahead,
Go
Joy.
ahead, please. Okay, buttressing on that, because I'm so keen on community, I think one thing that's very important, just as you said, humility is important, and I think also you might want to like have somebody who is an insider, like a research assistant. It could be very helpful, somebody who they trust and somebody who can be an inroad for you into the community. And I think another aspect of demonstrating humility is learning their language, maybe just some few words or some sentences. It could go a long way to make them feel like you actually respect them, you actually love them. I think that's also very important. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you both summed it up perfectly. One thing that I'll also add is I think just remaining mindful of the fact that you are working with a community. You're not just working in a community, but you're trying to participate and live life with these people and with these organizations and with these communities. So personally, I sat down and had lunch with the people that I would be working with multiple times before I actually started asking any questions or attending their meetings. Just, you know, listening and asking questions and making sure that the work that I was doing wasn't directed by me, but was directed by the community, and that I was fulfilling the needs and the desires of the community. And that's just a constant checking in, asking people, making sure that you're still on the same page.
Ash, I think that also boils down to something we were discussing some time ago about not creating this kind of the savior mindset that, oh, I'm coming to save you, something like that. So allow the community direct your work, sort of, so that they know that you are there to work with them. You're not there to just like be the big person up there and they are just down below. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like just to jump in, and I think you guys have really captured some of the overlapping themes and key issues. And I totally agree, Joy, around this kind of savior complex. I think definitely what I saw, this slip to paternalism, especially around such a sensitive issue, is very, very easy. So I think just listening without judgment, and sometimes if that means having to support them to do something that you wouldn't necessarily personally agree with, is important. And that's what I kind of saw in the criminal justice issue, because victims were wanting to push for their partners to be released. They were continuously turned away and silenced. And that was a further kind of a secondary form of punishment and a further process of marginalization. So I think listening without judgment and supporting them to follow what they want to do, as opposed to what you would personally do, or what the system or institution would personally do, is important.
Another question over here.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Israel with a Y, and my work really intersects a lot with your work, Ash. And I'd love to hear more about the third recommendation item, which is shutting down detention centers, and kind of beefing that up with context. We know and understand that here in California, those detention centers are run by private prisons that are also government funded. So immigration is a multi-trillion-dollar problem ran by organizations with multi-billion dollars in budget, with community-based organizations who have less than $1 million in reducing and transforming that harm. So I wonder what insights you found on the ground in terms of shutting down detention centers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Great question. Yeah, I'd love to situate that by pointing out that over 60% of detention centers in the US are privately operated by private corporations. So that's very relevant in thinking about the ways that people are detained in this country. The open-air detention centers in East San Diego County are run by Customs and Border Patrol. They're not run by external corporations. So these are literally refugee camps. They are open-air sites where no food, no water, and no shelter are provided. Over this summer, there were some developments through federal lawsuits that resulted in the implementation of restrooms at some of the sites and a water tank for drinking water at 2 of the sites, but those, both restrooms and water tanks, have been continually sabotaged, potentially, listening to the talk on the ground by organizations like Al Otro Lado and by refugees who are at these sites. Potentially, it's Customs and Border Patrol who are sabotaging these resources that are provided. So the open-air detention sites are really a farce of control. There's absolutely nothing safe about them, and there's absolutely nothing bureaucratically sound about them. It often takes weeks for people to be processed into the country in these open-air detention sites. And as I said, this often results in separation and deportation, since it is just not feasible to stay in these sites where, as I mentioned, temperatures range from freezing to over 120 degrees this past summer. Shutting down the open-air detention sites is a really, really big project that Al Otro Lado and many other organizations, including Haitian Bridge Alliance and No Mas Muertes, who I mentioned at the end, are collaboratively working on together. And there are a number of ongoing lawsuits that you can keep abreast of. But I will say that these open-air detention centers have been operating in East San Diego County since May of 2022. So it's not something that's new, and unfortunately, it's not something that I expect to see completely shut down anytime very soon. And that's one of the reasons that we all need to be so vocal, and as has been mentioned throughout this panel, the critical value of awareness. So thank you for that question.
More questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Chimbo Ronald, and I come from Uganda. My question directly goes to Dr. Noreen. I've worked with refugee organizations for a while under UNHCR, but the key challenges that we have under refugees is that most of the organizations that come and work for the refugees, they do not do a follow-up over these persons they are working on. And so these people get one-time referral and they are left right there. I've really read about the GBV in your articles. They are really good. But on paper, I don't know whether they are really going to impact the lives of people, like the way it is on paper. Because in Africa, Uganda, most of these organizations really come and they do a paperwork, but the tangibility on the refugee is not felt. And in the end, the project ends, but the continuity of life of this person is left in the air. So That's my question. Thank you so much.
100%. So the question is, NGOs will come in and they will, help refugees initially with counseling or whatever services they need for GBV, but then they leave, and the refugees or the individuals affected are kind of left behind beyond a certain point. And I think that's one of the key challenges, right? Is that there's a lack of funding. That's always a big issue. But organizations will come in and they'll provide like this Band-Aid, initial services for these refugee women, and then, they hit a key point where they either don't have any more funding, or their priorities change, and that was something that happened with our organization this summer. So I was there, and with the conflict that's happening in Gaza right now, they pivoted, and a lot of their funding they just diverted, and so the funding that we had for our mental health services for these GBV victims was cut back. And so I think the key there is that we have to build capacity amongst the local communities. And that's really the only way to do it, to make this sustainable, is to, partner with local healthcare workers and local kind of community-based organizations to be able to provide these services going forward. Because it's true, like even when I was there, we had a group of professionals going from Amman into Jerash. It's like an hour drive. But those folks that on the team were they were burned out. Even for them, they were like, we can't be doing this. This is not sustainable for us even. And so so their goals going forward are really to work with people in Jerash, in the local communities, to train them to provide these services. And honestly, that's the only way to make this sustainable going forward. But it's a huge problem.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this question? We will then have time for one more. One more question from the audience, if anyone has one. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Yvette. Just kind of piggybacking on the question and the conversation. Do any of the organizations that come in or the models that are there, like you said, training folks on the ground, provide already that technical service, like certification, allowing them to get that sustained, trained as a medical professional, for example, since they're already at capacity, knowing that maybe getting to academia or being in health is not impossible, but getting some sort of certification that would allow them to be there and on the ground, ready, getting some worth out of it, because folks are trying to survive, and at the same time, it's like, how do we make it meaningful so that it's not just a Band-Aid solution of folks coming in and out, right? Or waiting for the next researcher or organization to reach out with funding. So how do we certify or give folks, I guess, the resources they actually need? How do we start to implement those types of training services, I guess? I said that too many times, but.
Great question, thank you.
So at OSAM, we have already started, to do some of this capacity building. So with each of these gender-based violence awareness sessions, we have women who are part of that local community who are actually taking part in some kind of abbreviated trainings to start. And these are the best women to be a part of this awareness and raising the awareness, because many of them have already lived it. And so this actually, as part of our program, is already started. And it's really key, because these are the women that are going to be living in this community. There's no formal certification process as of yet, but I think based on, as the program becomes more robust and they have more women that are interested in getting this training, I think that should be coming down the line as well.
Yeah, I will also say that the organization that I worked with, Al Otro Lado, the majority of the staff are formerly deported people living in Tijuana, now helping deported people. In fact, this summer, they opened a binational deportee welcome center. It's essentially a little booth right on the Mexican side of the border, so that they're able to be the first face that is seen once someone is deported. And the team managing the deportation center are former deportees themselves. So yes, I think this acknowledgement that the best people to help, the best people to be on the front lines are the people with the experience, are the people who have lived this, the community members themselves. And as you pointed out, it's really important to make sure that these same people don't experience burnout, aren't re-traumatized, and that we're able to support them and the very important work that they can bring to the table.
Anybody else?
I would just jump in with, one comment, just
please
because
go
my
ahead.
context is quite different, but raises some of the same issues, but maybe potential challenges associated with it, because there's definitely been a push within NAJA and other similar organizations to try and create programs that for Aboriginal people to become lawyers, but thinking about it within a colonial system as that being something potentially that Aboriginal people wouldn't want to do because it requires them to kind of conform and bend to a colonial apparatus and work within it. And so I think not just capacity building within organizations, but thinking about projects of decolonization. So how could Aboriginal forms of justice exist outside of a criminal justice framework, and how could those potentially be uplifted as alternatives to the court is something that we can also think about.
I think this also makes me remember the importance of several organizations coming together to collaborate. Just like we mentioned some times ago that, there might be an instance of several organizations working on the same project, doing the same kind of work, but they are all working on their own and they are not collaborating. Maybe even kind of competing amongst themselves. Like several resettlement agencies, for instance, might even be competing for resources, competing for so many things. But if these organizations could come together to collaborate, so that even when maybe some of these organizations are no longer there, others who are there in that environment can actually continue the work. So I see collaboration as something very important to ensure that this work is sustained.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Joy. And I would say, like, these international organizations also working with the community-based organizations, right, is key.
Exactly, so that, there is a collaboration,
Well, thank you very much, and let's give a big hand to panel one.
Thank you.
This second panel is called Upholding the Future, the Role of Human Rights in the Fight for Environmental Justice. Joining us for this panel are Kara Schulte, who is a PhD student at the School of Public Health here at Berkeley, Alejo Garcia, also a PhD student at the School of Natural Resources, Shavar Martin, an undergrad from the African American Studies program, and Yvette Vargas, who's a Masters of Science program, a student who apparently brought a lot of friends with her today from the School of Information. Yes, please welcome our second panel.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking the HRC crew for putting together this marvelous conference. Great job. Thank you so much. Also, thanking you all for being here with us. And my name is Alejo Garcia. I'm a sixth-year PhD student in the Environmental Science, Policy, and Management Department. And today, I want to talk about the effects of green capitalism on the rural livelihoods of Colombian peasants, particularly in the Upper Magdalena River Basin, so the UMR for a shorthand. But what is green capitalism? By green capitalism, I'm referring to the market-based set of strategies and mechanisms designed to either adapt or mitigate climate change impacts. So let's keep that in mind. We're talking about the main set of mechanisms that governments or corporations rely on to tackle climate change these days. And while we know we have a fairly good grasp of what's going on in terms of the efficiency of those mechanisms, we know far less about the lived experiences of the people inhabiting the areas where those mechanisms are being implemented. So therefore, I want to invite us to think about how is it to live in the shadows of green capitalism. That's jumping. So the answer to that question is highly contextual and place-based. Due to the tropical regions, particular histories, ecologies, and also geopolitical relations, green capitalism efforts often take the shape of hydropower dams and or conservation areas. In the UMR, climate change concerns have reignited projects to build 15, 17 more dams in an area that has already 2 dams, and also to expand conservation areas in an area that has already 42 conservation areas between national, regional, and municipal parks. So we're talking about a massive change in a fairly small area of the country. So the question for me here is, how is it the burden of saving the planet being distributed? If we are talking about these massive changes, how is the burden of transforming and saving the planet from climate change being distributed, and what role is going to play the tropical areas and also the peoples inhabiting these regions? So to answer those questions, over the summer, I partnered with the Fundación Somos Yuma, a peasant-led organization of river and forest defenders, and we created a research plan. So firstly, given the nature of Fundación Somos Yuma's work, we decided on using engaged ethnographic methods and also semi-structured interviews to get data. We also decided on using not only the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but specifically the right to an adequate standard of living to understand and make visible the dire situation of peasants in the UMR. And third, we identified 3 different key sites to get data, to collect data on those issues. So each of those places is inhabited by a different community and also speaks to different aspects of the violation of the right to an adequate standard of living. So let me walk you through the cases and show you our main findings. So the first case is fishing communities in the Betania Dam. So as you probably know, dams are super well known to disrupt the native fish reproductive cycle due to the barriers they introduce in the river course, and also because the changes in seasonal levels of water that they produce. In the Betania Dam, the disruption of native fish reproductive cycles is a major issue for fishing communities who rely on fishing and fish as their main source of protein intake. And this, for us, for the research team, this speaks about a violation of fisher folks' right to an adequate food and nutritious food. So one aspect of the right to an adequate standard of living. The second case is the case of La Cañada. This is a town in the second dam. Dams are also super well known to transform the landscapes they are built in, and they are suspected to introduce land instability in highly seismological areas. So La Cañada is a small town of small farmers community located at the top of a riverbank, right in front of the dam. And the changes in water levels that hydropower constantly produces are constantly eroding the bank, producing what you can see in the picture to your left, massive cracks in the houses. What's happening, in other words, is that the bank on which the community's town sits on is basically losing stability. And this is a major risk, not only to the right of housing, which is the one we are using, but also to their own lives. And the third case is conservation areas in the Quinchana Park. So Quinchana is a small town of small farmers and peasant communities located in the headwaters of the river. And here, dam proponents are showing up as the new champions of conservation. Basically, they're trying to greenwash all the human rights violations downstream by putting their capital to the service of conservation agencies to buy large tracts of land to devote it to strict conservation. What's the outcome? The outcome is that peasant communities that have taken care and also used the forest are being cornered, not being able to use wood for housing, for cooking, and also being pressured into selling their own lands. So let me go back to my first question. So how is it to live in the shadows of green capitalism? I think the words of one of my collaborators put it clearly. So the dam promoters always emphasized that their goal was to improve our lives. After 15 or 16 years, it's the opposite. Our lives have deteriorated radically. So my take on what's going on there is that in the UMR, in the name of climate change adaptation and mitigation, green capitalism is actually undermining the livelihoods of the very same stewards of the forest and the river, and therefore actually closing a valuable opportunity for us to address the climate crisis from this particular region. So it's undermining our own contributions to how to save the planet. And my invitation for you today, guys, is we need to move away from these very abstract labels of, for example, clean energy or conservation. We really need to interrogate the justice-related outcomes of each of those labels, because that works very differently on the ground, as you can see. And the human rights framework is a really good one to actually make visible and call international attention to what's going on the ground with those projects. So if you want to contribute to the struggles of the UMR peasants to protect the forest and protect their livelihoods, please reach out to us at escueladelagua.org. I'm going to say it in Spanish. escueladelagua.org. Please join us. We are super happy to collaborate with you. Thank you.
Step into my role momentarily. Imagine walking on a long dirt road with dust blowing from all corners of your surroundings, and the sun is so bright, it alters your vision. As you walk towards your office, you see a young girl walking with a large yellow jerry can that's nearly half her size. Hours later, you walk back home on your lunch break, and you see the same young child struggling to carry this large yellow jerry can, now filled with water. This is one girl out of millions of women and children that are charged in the daily struggle for survival. But after 3 months, I realized this is not an anomaly. This is the grim reality of millions of people across the Global South and Tanzania, and the people in Shirati that I stayed with. This summer, during my fieldwork with the NGO, the Maji Safi Group, in rural Shirati, Tanzania, which promotes health and disease prevention through community education and provides basic sanitation facilities, I investigated the human consequences of water rights violation and the lack of sanitation services and infrastructure. Rural villages by Lake Victoria are a 2.5-mile journey from the Maji Safi office, and it takes 2 hours to go and 2 hours back, where they collect mostly contaminated water infested by open defecation and urination. And when consumed, this water leads to, and when consumed, bacterial and viral infections in humans. Most Tanzanians collect water there for their daily use, to wash, to bathe, to cook, to clean, and to drink. But there is no other option. In Tanzania, and large portions of the Global South, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. They live in a world where poverty is omnipresent, with 43 million Tanzanians risking their lives daily to obtain water, a prerequisite for sustainable development goals. Its unavailability affects all facets of life, and their humanity is a common denominator that has become compounding human rights violation that expands from inequalities to deepening injustices. And the denial of water and sanitation are nearly not incidental to nearly every other human rights, but the denial of them. The inaccessibility of water, it limits education for girls and children that spend most of their time collecting water that could be spent just being a child. Women and girls bear the burden of gender-based violence and gender-based poverty from washing and waiting in long lines at insignificant water systems. Further, many women face physical violation when trying to get water. The lack of water and sanitation, these are the conditions that strip people of their basic dignity and force them to forego unhygienic and degrading practices. Surviving without adequate water system is nearly impossible. Water is essential for agriculture, livestock, and unclean water undermines human rights to food, dignity, and humanity of those I encountered daily. Many felt unworthy relieving themselves after eating and drinking because there is a massive need for basic sanitation facilities. And the only option is open defecation and urination, a shameful practice. But because generally there is no option for water accessibility, diarrhea, contamination usually spreads from person to person. Mothers are struggling to feed their families and their children nutritional and contaminant-free foods. Washing foods and drinking untreated water results in more infection. The only widely used water treatment is a cloth that is used to cover another container to filter out particles, leaving behind invisible and unwanted contaminants. The health and well-being are also violated. Without clean water, the right to adequate standard of living, work, education, it exposes families to more diseases that further exacerbate health inequalities. And in rural Tanzania, households with water systems are rare. They depend on unprotected water systems, and they collect water for families and animals at rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, and the roadside. They drink contaminated water with pollutants, agricultural runoff, and deadly pathogens. These impacts are rooted in the poor water access. It reduces the workforce, and many adults are constantly ill or caring for a loved one who needs assistance due to waterborne diseases. Thousands die each year from infections, just as one of my colleagues died during my research because he couldn't afford water treatment for himself and for his family. But the impact of diarrhea, typhoid, cholera, those are common diseases that are normalized in this region. And the dangers of accepting these preventable diseases are a fact of life that reduces the urgency in preventing them. However, Tanzania is a paradox. 61% of Tanzanians have access to water. 32% have access to sanitation, and 48% have hygiene access. But Tanzania is not a desert. It's a paradox amidst the abundance of water that surrounds Lake Victoria. They share borders with 8 other East African countries and are surrounded by a vast body of water that remains unusable due to salinity and contamination. Despite being surrounded by 3 primary water sources, Lake Victoria, Lake Nyasa, and Lake Tanganyika, water access is a daily challenge for people in Tanzania. It contradicts the complexity of water access, where availability does not equate to accessibility. The lack of water infrastructure compounds these challenges, resulting in waterborne illnesses, premature death, and the impact on the ecosystem and climate change. Clean and safe water is essential to human rights, and 2.2 billion people struggle worldwide just to access this source. And that's 80% of Tanzanian that lives in rural poverty and face significant challenges accessing water supply systems. Clean and safe water, as we know it, is vital to human sustainability and survival. And in closing, I want you to pay attention to something more personal that I learned this summer in Tanzania. Fighting for water is like a dream, and when you wake up, you fight like hell to get it. Furthermore, my stake in sustainable development and impartial resource oversight is imperative in comprehending its complexity and the gravity at the issue. We must treat this issue just as we treat every other issue in the right to vote or the right to speak freely. And in essence, I'm talking about the fundamental human right to live in dignity, to have water, to have sanitation. And it's time we fight for this once and for all. Thank you.
All right, is everybody good? Yeah, awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. My name is Yvette Vargas, a second-year Information and Management Systems student from the School of Information. I'm here to present my project titled Unpacked, Databasing the Inland Empire's Warehousing Crisis with my organization, the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice, otherwise known as CCAJ, and they're here tonight. Imagine you're a family of horse trainers raising 3 children. When a representative from a large company tells you that your property is in the way of their 213-acre warehousing project, an equivalent to 50 football fields. Despite resisting, you're met with a note stapled to your fence, a padlocked gate, a bulldozer tearing down your fence while your family is in the house, and later discovering that the county approved the project and your landlord sold the property without your knowledge. With no protections for residents and no existing law or policies to prevent this from happening, you are forced to not only sell your livestock, but to leave your home permanently. This was the reality for Felipe Ortiz and his family in Bloomington, California, where 117 homes are set for demolition to make way for the Bloomington Business Park as proposed by Howard Industries. Despite community resistance, many families, like the Ortizes, have been displaced and are currently still seeking for resettlement. His and the other homes are highlighting the growing warehousing crisis in the Inland Empire. Unfortunately, their story is just one of many. Bloomington is one of many cities in the Inland Empire, a region in Southern California that includes San Bernardino and Riverside counties. San Bernardino is the largest county in the United States, home to nearly 2.2 million people, over half of whom are minorities. The Inland Empire is the central hub for logistics, with 40% of the nation's goods passing through the region. The recent explosion in warehouse construction, especially during COVID, has led to a warehousing crisis. Conglomerates are purchasing residential land without policies in place to protect residents, leading to this displacement. Oh, actually, no. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Beyond housing, the region faces an environmental crisis. According to the Lung Association, San Bernardino County has been ranked the most polluted in the United States for ozone and air pollution for the second time in a row. Additionally, due to the influx of smog and pollutants from warehousing facilities, asthma rates are rising among residents near logistics centers and rail yards. Extreme heat waves, ongoing food deserts, and the other environmental issues further compound the challenges faced by the Inland Empire. One of the most fundamental components of human rights is the right to not only have a healthy environment, but the right to participate in environmental decision-making and have accurate information throughout this process. The main goal of my project is to provide the groundwork of a database that consolidates environmental information, making it accessible for the Inland Empire community, my community, to support their fight for environmental justice. Partnering with CCAJ, I approached this from an informational perspective to improve how we can store, retrieve, and use environmental data. There has been progress in making information accessible, but more is needed. Environmental injustices are escalating, yet local organizations face barriers like industry and local government resistance, and the instability of social media platform policies that could hinder communication with locals at any point. The region also lacks a technological landscape and an outdated and at times slow progression of academic coverage of the region, all of which hinders media literacy within the region's populations, especially for low-income, working-class, and immigrant communities. Despite the challenges, I am committed to this project because trying is better than doing nothing. Creating this database involves several challenges, such as assessing existing infrastructure, tools, and digital access, as well as defining what is environmental information. There was no prior literature from an environmental management or data science perspective on the region, so I had to create my own data collection methods. Through my fellowship, I power mapped the Inland Empire's information landscape through the eyes of CCAJ, conducted a civilian survey on environmental awareness through CCAJ's social media platforms and tabling events, performed a legal risk assessment on the material that CCAJ would ideally like to share with the public, and proposed a detailed database design. As of now, I am currently working on creating a white paper for how to continue developing the database. Based on my assessments, I found several key insights. Inland Empire civilians struggle to access environmental information, even in an academic setting. There are other mentioned pain points, such as limited Wi-Fi, lack of tech resources, and the high cost of internet services. Despite this, many residents want to stay informed about the environmental challenges in the region and are aware of these issues. They also recognize the important work being done by environmental justice groups like CCAJ. Even with the infrastructural challenges, they want a tool that can streamline all of this information. While time constraints prevented me from the full implementation and, unfortunately, the political climate of the region, the next steps are clear. Moving forward, the focus will be on, sorry, I lost my train of thought, gathering the necessary resources to support the database's development, conducting user tests, and to redefine the design and also the scope of the resources, defining protocols around privacy, security, and legal accountability. And the most important and crucial step, building a community pipeline to foster local tech talent will be crucial to ensure long-term sustainability and continued growth of the database. If there is anything that I learned from being a resident of the region, the Inland Empire is arguably facing not just an environmental crisis, but a human one, a human rights one. And at the heart of both is the absence of accessible, reliable information. This project seeks to fill that gap. By providing tools to access and share environmental justice information, I hope it can empower residents to act, support advocacy efforts, and push for policy changes that protect all of our communities. I invite you all to engage with this issue, support local initiatives, and help raise awareness about the ongoing warehousing crisis. And you can start today. I first want to thank CCAJ staff, my friends Ryan Corral and Romel Culara, Professor Michael Rivera from the iSchool, Jimmy Zavala, Betsy Popkin from HRC, Laura Kelvin, Emily Zettner, Fernando Durazo, and Anthony Victoria from the Frontline Observer. As for audience members, I encourage you to recognize not just CCAJ, but the extended recognition of the highlighted organizations, for they too deserve of equal credit and respect of their work on this issue. I am humbled to use this platform to give a home and a spotlight. We are often dismissed and ignored both statewide and within the larger environmental justice dialogue. It is time that the Inland Empire is fully valued and ultimately to respect the people who care deeply about their communities. Thank you so much.
All right, another dynamite panel. Let's get some questions from the audience. There's one.
This question is for Shavar. I loved your presentation, and access to water is the most fundamental right we have as humans. Now, my question is, through your insight, do you think that infrastructure in water systems, like drilling down into the water table, is more like sustainable, or giving more like cleansing for water, like filtering systems, is more advantageous? Because I know that it's not a one size fits all for everybody, but through your insight, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, actually, drilling more into the ground, making boreholes, is sort of the most prevalent source of water systems that they have, but it also leads to contaminants. There's a lot of arsenic and fluoride that comes with that water that's underground, and people are affected by it. The most effective way to get water that I've seen, and that could be implemented more detailed, is a underground water pipe system from Lake Victoria that could support the entire region. But because of the lack of infrastructure and materials to build those underground pipes, most people have to go to the lake itself with buckets to collect that water. And I think the further and the more depoliticized water can be in Tanzania, the more people would get access to it.
Thank you. That's a great question. Let's get some more. Here we go. This is Tabesh, a former fellow of this program. Welcome, Tabesh.
Thank you. Congratulations to all of you. Great presentations. My question is to Kara. I've been to Dhaka, so I've seen some of the areas that are in that realm of production of clothing and shoes and other materials that are exported. I think you've touched on two elements in this process, that for people who are affected, who are the workers, laborers, and probably the managers or the owners. But have you ever thought of who is the person or the entity that they're negotiating with? Because they are the ones who are dictating the price of these garments or the shoes. And from those prices, these amenities and or services are being provided to the laborers. So what do you think can be done with the owners or the entities like Nike to make a better deal so the owners can provide a better service to the laborers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. There was a 7-minute presentation, so I left out a lot of important parts, but you're right, buyers are a really key piece of the conversation and will be included in the policy brief that I'm writing and also in the Human Rights Report. But I think a quick kind of example of something we could do would look like the EU due diligence law that was passed over the summer. So companies in the EU that are purchasing garments made in Bangladesh have an obligation under that directive to investigate supply chains and make sure there aren't environmental and human rights abuses. But we don't have anything like that in the US. So it's on personal buyers now, but of course we'd need systemic change. And I think that's a really, really important piece of this conversation because that's where quota pressures come from. If we're selling clothing for very cheap or people are purchasing clothing for very cheap, then we can't afford to pay workers more and improve conditions.
Thanks for that question. Here's one over here. Another former fellow, Muleka, welcome.
Again, to piggyback onto Besh, congratulations to all four of you for accomplishing a summer. I have many questions, but I will try to distill them into one. With the exception of Yvette's research, all your research were in Global South countries. However, what I'm hearing is a power dynamic with all these communities that all of you worked with. Barring a revolution / consequential elections, the hope of benevolent leaders who would be elected with everyone in mind, what thoughts and insights would the four of you potentially have when it comes to shifting this power dynamics from politicians to the people? Like, how would your communities feel like their need is addressed, barring what could happen in the political realm? Because we're always taught to look at our governments because that's where the power lies, right? But what I'm hearing is there's a power vacuum. We need communities. It's a long question, hard answer. It's okay.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I think one thing is just to, I'd say the first thing is to think about other stakeholders that have power. So not necessarily the community, but like we were just talking about, buyers. You don't have to necessarily look towards politicians. You can look towards companies, and a lot of that can just simply be education. When you, in my research, for example, when you have healthier workers and you have happier workers, there's a lot of research to say that you actually improve productivity, which can then translate into financial gain. So unfortunately, we live in a world where money is power, and so that's another pathway, is just simply education. Like right now, these rights abuses could also be financial losses.
I'm going to piggyback off of Kara because I think one of the things that I kind of want to address is the power of this idea, what is education? And a lot of times, from what I have observed from community members, there's this belief that they don't know everything because they, quote unquote, didn't go to college, they didn't go to community college, et cetera. And one of the things that I would like to dispel is that they are smart. They are brilliant. They know what they are talking about. The thing that's going to be challenging, and I can only speak for myself, and I know what that looks like because I too was judged simply because I live in the Inland Empire, and I was believed that I couldn't even be here at UC Berkeley just simply because I'm from that region. So I had to really prove to myself that I was deserving, but also to empower others, even if they don't have the right resources or the right opportunities like myself. So one thing that I would like to advocate is this idea that community needs to be the focus. Community has the answers. Community has the knowledge. Just because they're not from an educational setting doesn't mean that their knowledge is invalid. And as academics, I know some of us are here because we are academics, we need to dispel that power dynamic. It's our responsibility too. The second thing that I also want to address is because I acknowledge that I am from a STEM background. I also understand that that comes with privileges too. And for those who are in STEM, I think there is a huge obligation to realize that we too have a right to say that this needs to be done. Just because we're not from the Bay Area doesn't mean that we can't help the Inland Empire. They have so many ideas that they're eager, but just simply because of the region and how it's portrayed because of this warehousing crisis, they're dispelled. And students from Cal State San Bernardino and UCR, they're actively working on a grassroots level. And I want to acknowledge them, and I didn't get a chance to highlight it, and I realized that I didn't show the slide. How silly of me. But you know, it's just so disappointing that I have to come to Timbuktu just to be and get the resources that I need. So for anyone who's in the STEM program or any affiliate with engineering, computer science, you too have a right to say, maybe the dynamics that we have are not right. Sure, it's hard. Yes, it's not prestigious like a Fortune 500 company, but it doesn't mean that you can't start planting the seeds to make that shift and to start growing a community garden.
All right. More audience questions. Yes. Yet another alumna of the fellowship program. Meghana, welcome.
Thank you all so much for your presentation. They were all really great. I have a couple follow-up questions for Cara. The first question is, as you think about extreme weather conditions and who's most at risk, I was wondering if migration came up. I know Bangladesh has I think almost 1 million Rohingya refugees, and so did you find they were more at risk? And the second question is, you chose to focus on Dhaka, which is a very urban setting. Did you think about the risk in like urban, so like factories versus rural areas like agriculture? Because I know Bangladesh is very rapidly industrializing, urbanizing, and so if you think there's more risk in urban areas, that's also another factor.
Thank you for both of those questions. Okay, so the first question was on migration. It did come up a lot of times. People in Dhaka live in villages that are often flooded, and then they come to the city. So many of the delivery and rickshaw drivers that we interviewed as part of this study were climate migrants in a sense. And so I think to help support that statement, Dhaka, when it was formed in the 70s, was around 1 million people, and today it's 23 million people. And a huge proportion of that is due to coastal flooding. So migration definitely came up. Your second question about urban versus rural. So Dhaka, there's something called the urban heat island effect, which basically means that concrete and all of these structures don't absorb heat in the way that natural land and green spaces do. So urban areas can actually be up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. And a lot of times the population density and the amount of different building materials can increase the temperature. So it tends to be industrial areas or poorer neighborhoods where there's high population density, and all across Dhaka there's really high population density that are warmer. So we thought that focusing on urban workers would be important, but I'm also working on another project in Dhaka that focuses on rural labor, and so we'll try to kind of compare and contrast that data, and then I'll also plug the Human Rights Center's project working with agricultural workers on climate issues in California, and that's more rural.
This question is for Alejandro. I do a lot of work in green energy spaces. And so I was very curious on the relationship between communities and the entities that implement these green solutions, and whether or not we see this power dynamic of communities being extracted from for the sake of green energy versus like actual participation from communities in that realm. Or if there is like grassroots participation trying to develop these systems and stuff like that.
So thank you for your question. Well, the relationship between, is this working? Yeah. Okay. The relationship between the communities and the companies there is, I would say, a little bit paradoxic, because on the one hand, communities definitely don't want dams and don't want those kind of conservation projects, but at the same time, when those dams arrive to the areas, they become the major source of labor, and they hire a lot of people, and they bring a lot of capital into the areas. So at the same time, people face this kind of double bind. They don't want them, and at some point they become reliant on the opportunities that those companies provide for the region. Of course, the companies know that very clearly. They do it, mindfully on purpose. So what they do is they exploit that tension that the people inhabit in order to entrench the communities further in their networks. So yes, I would say that's an extractive relationship. Companies are using the power of money in order to shape community relationships to get what they want. So it is an extractive relationship. And there's also, on the side, participation and community grassroots organizations doing the work of making all this visible, and also harnessing the power of international collaborations with different scholars and different activists from around the world in order to fight back those power relationships that they are finding themselves into. So there is a massive movement there in the Upper Magdalena River Basin against dams and now against parks, because they're partially related. And that's, of course, not thanks to the companies, but it is interesting that the companies are still willing to actually put money into those movements, to try to bring them into their realm. So it's a constant struggle as well to find the resources to be able to sustain independent movements, to fight against those green extractive companies, and maintain the independence, and also to scale up the struggle to the levels of grassroots movements being able to dispute power to a massive company as Enel. That's the name of the company. So yeah, thank you for your question.
I think we have time for maybe one more question in the crowd, and I see it right over here.
Hello, this question is actually for Yvette Vargas. And it's a pretty simple question. What is CCAJ's largest obstacle, and how can the common man help?
Oh boy, where do I begin? Oh my God. I mean, there's just so many, because the Inland Empire is huge. Like, I wish I could show you like a larger picture in comparison to like LA County, San Diego County, even the Bay Area. Like it is massive, right? So I would say the first is just asking questions. Like, we have CCAJ here, so I think they are here to answer any follow-up questions, and I think they will be more than willing to direct you to how to help. But I think the other things to consider is really just, oh God, really just understand the power dynamics that are happening in the region. I think we have several companies. One of them is by, I don't know if you heard of this company, Amazon, that unfortunately has played a huge role in just masking some of their initiatives as the quote-unquote good neighbor policy, where they're trying to give donations to schools and all these other public nonprofit initiatives, but really it's greenwashing in disguise. And one of the things that I would recognize is research those facilities, research the donation, the big entities, and ask yourself, is this something that they're donating to mask? Is this something that they're trying to hide something? This right here is far more complicated. I know it's a research thing, but the first thing is just really just talking to somebody from the region, and we have CCAJ here, so, and we also have somebody from another entity that I wish I could highlight right now, but they can answer all these questions, and I think I'm not the best point of contact, so I'm going to give them the spotlight and just, again, just highlighting that they are the voice of reason when it comes to how to help out.
Bravo, thank you so much, panel. Let's have one more hand for these great students.
Hello, my name is Sabrine Tuku, and today I will be speaking about the work I did this past summer in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with the organization, the Center for Advancement of Rights and Democracy, or more commonly referred to as CARD, where I investigated the dual impacts of the internet and social media use on Ethiopian populations, with a specific focus on female human rights defenders. I want you to think to the last time you were scrolling on social media. Maybe you saw a cute cafe post on a friend's story, or a funny tweet, and then think of another time where you're scrolling and you're seeing the same content that you typically do, but a specific hashtag or an image of a person appears. And at first you brush it off, but then it's filled across your feed. You see it everywhere. For some of us, you might have experienced this with the murder of George Floyd. And for others, with the screams of a Palestinian parent looking down at their killed child. Or if you were in Ethiopia this past summer, this image of a little girl. Haven was just 7 years old when she was raped, mutilated, and murdered by her mother's landlord. And her case sparked public outcry in Ethiopia this past year. And it highlights the dichotomy of the internet and social media use in the nation. Every week, I would go into the office and I would monitor social media sites. I would look at news articles, I would analyze comments and images, and I bore witness to the incredible innovative nature and power of the internet and social media in building a civic and media landscape in Ethiopia. And yet, I also bear witness to the very harmful and dangerous effects that the social media and internet has. CARD creates bi-weekly social media sensitivity reports, and from April 16th to September 15th of 2024, we monitored a total of 5,578 social media pages. In these pages, we verified 125 pieces of content with false information, 550 that contained ethnic-based hate speech, 315 with gender-based hate speech, 65 with faith-based hate speech, and 326 which incited violence. And before I continue, I would like to give a trigger warning to everyone in the audience that this presentation contains moments and images, sorry, not images, but comments of sexual violence, hate-based hate speech, and violence against women. If you feel the need to leave the room at any point, please do so. With a population of only 123 million people, the second largest in Africa, and only 17% of the population having access to the internet, deep-seated ethnic, religious, and gender-based divisions, combined with a low digital literacy rate, have turned social media into a battleground for further polarizing these divides across the nation. And as I continue to monitor social media, I noticed that women, specifically human rights defenders, activists, and content creators, are facing the most horrific digital threats. Noticing this trend, I began researching whatever existing reports there are, and almost all of them concluded that there has been an increased online violence against female human rights defenders. Thus, we decided to make a survey. We wanted to figure out what this looks like in the Ethiopian context, and the findings were harrowing. One of the female human rights defenders reported that she, quote, had to delete my social media account and take extra measures to be safe due to threats of physical violence, avoiding going out for a period of time. In addition to hate speech, she reported experiencing threats to her reputation, threats of physical violence and abuse, and threats of doxing. She even shared that often digital threats escalate into physical violence, and she further stated that these conditions can easily silence women. Another female respondent noted that on average she received over 4 digital threats a month, specifically reporting that these digital threats, quote, have a significant impact on my personal and professional life. I often find myself self-censoring to protect my family, and I feel a constant sense of anxiety about my safety and that of my loved ones. The types of threats that female human rights defenders and women who speak out against injustice face are a great hindrance to journalism and human rights work. As these testimonies prove that to be true, the discourse of Haven's death further exhibited the threats women face while speaking up in Ethiopia. The use of social media and the internet in calling for a public outcry for justice for Haven was incredible. A story that had gone unheard of for a year was finally gaining the attention it deserved. It was getting international attention with an article from the BBC calling for the protection of women and children, even gaining popularity by artists like Cardi B calling on people to sign a petition for justice for Haven and her mother, garnering over 320,000 signatures. Yet not all netizens supported this campaign. Haven's mother had been threatened not only by her daughter's murderer, but also across the internet. This screenshot is from a TikTok in which the poster had spoken about Haven's case, and these are some of the hateful comments she received. He should have done her in the mouth as well, in reference to Haven's rape. And, are you degrading the Amharic language, you bitch? I wish he raped you in the ass too. Part of the social media discourse also took an ethnic division when a content creator made hateful remarks politicizing Haven's rape, claiming that because her mother had married a man of a different ethnic group, she deserved this, and that we shouldn't help her. Ethnic divisions continued even further when posters were uploading images such as this, claiming that Amaras, a specific ethnic group, are known rapists. This case illustrates the dual nature of the internet. It's a powerful tool for spreading knowledge and news, and even considered a human right by some. But it also deepens divisions, spreads misinformation, and fuels hate speech. But this issue is not unique to the Ethiopian context. For example, Facebook's algorithm contributed to the conditions that forced the Rohingya to flee Myanmar. There has been mass spread of misinformation with claims that a Hamas assault had been staged when in fact it was a video game. And there were false reports that the US Lebanese embassy had been evacuated in October of 2023 when that wasn't the case. In this digital age where information spreads rapidly and anonymously, the internet can be both an invaluable resource and a dangerous weapon. And while I don't have a solution or an answer, I believe that it's crucial that we address these issues, as unchecked misinformation and hate speech will continue to move from the digital landscape and into the physical one. 2021 Nobel Peace Prize laureate and journalist Maria Ressa, who has been awarded for incredible work on trying to address disinformation and misinformation, articulated it beautifully. The easiest part is dealing with the impact of online violence and disinformation on me. I just see the impact on the world, and I don't know why we are not panicking. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is AJ Al-Kurdi. I am a third-year PhD student in ethnic studies here at Berkeley with a background as a human rights lawyer, and I'm honored to share insights from my recent fieldwork on Romani LGBTQI organizing in Budapest, Hungary. And this presentation, titled An Apologetic Resistance, Romani Queer Solidarity in Budapest, offers a glimpse into the work I engage with through my research. So since this is a predominantly US audience, so the words Budapest and Romani may have flown over the heads of some. So to set the stage, I want to first explain the sociopolitical landscape of the context I'm discussing. Budapest is the capital of Hungary, which is a Central European country with a population of 9.7 million people. It has a rich cultural heritage, but is currently facing significant challenges with neo-fascism, cutbacks on human rights, and suppression of dissent. The Romani people, often referred to as Roma, are the largest ethnic minority in Hungary, making up approximately 8 to 10% of the population. Historically marginalized, they face widespread discrimination, socioeconomic disadvantages, and social exclusion. In the past 10 years, Hungary has faced controversies for closing its borders to the immigrants and refugees in the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the persecution of the violent current Syrian and Egyptian regimes. The Hungarian government's stance has been largely anti-immigrant, marked by xenophobic and nationalistic policies. Increasing Islamophobic and racist tropes about refugees have been promoted alongside anti-Semitic imagery, painting leftist opposition candidates and Jewish philanthropist George Soros as enablers of migration and as contributors to increased terrorist threats. These narratives have been propagated alongside campaigns against gender ideology, targeting LGBTQI people. This has further strained social cohesion and amplified tensions between people. And under the authoritarian rule of the Fidesz party led by the Prime Minister Viktor Orban, there has been a noticeable shift towards nationalist rhetoric and policies that undermine the democratic principles and human rights of people. The government's use of xenophobic and anti-Semitic propaganda has not only marginalized immigrants and refugees, but also intensified the divisions in society. So the core issue that interested me as a Palestinian Romani immigrant in Budapest and in my practice as a lawyer revolves around systemic oppression orchestrated by the Hungarian government. The Fidesz party has implemented policies that erode democratic institutions and target marginalized groups through nationalist and populist rhetoric. The Romani community continues to face systemic discrimination, including high unemployment rates, segregated education, and limited access to public and services, and they often reside in segregated rural settlements, exacerbating socioeconomic disparities. So, as I have mentioned a bit earlier, the LGBTQI community has also been under attack. Recent legislation bans legal gender recognition for trans people, restricts adoption rights, and prohibits access to LGBTQI content for minors. This is highly unusual for a country that has been at the forefront of legal and political progress on sexual, gender, and bodily rights accomplished by civil society bodies. And this significant shift downward in the past 14 years can be best described by political scientists as democratic backsliding that results in a liberal mobilization, and the latter is a governmental practice that legitimizes the discrimination and fosters hostile attitude in society. For Romani LGBTQI individuals, these challenges intersect, resulting in triple discrimination from the Romani community due to their LGBTQI identity, from the LGBTQI community because of the Romani heritage, and from the broader society for both. Adding another layer to its rampant anti-Semitism, the Hungarian government's anti-immigrant stance and suppression of pro-Palestinian dissent, which protests the ongoing genocide in Palestine by the settler colonial entity of Israel, is reflective of a broader trend in Central Europe, including Austria and Germany. These countries maintain strong diplomatic ties with Israel, partly due to their position in NATO, alignment with US imperial interests in the Arab region, particularly to oil, and their historical involvement in the Holocaust. This context further marginalizes immigrant communities and activists in Hungary that struggle at the intersection of racism, homo, and transphobia, often labeling them as threats to national identity. This past summer was pivotal for the movement. As a leading activist in the Romani Circle, I organized formal and informal community gatherings in which discussions were had on the experiences of these groups and their experiences with social and family hostilities, legal and welfare systems. A three-day forum training activists and mainstream movements to understand the intersection of homotransphobia and racism, and a solidarity building and organizing event that not only fostered community but also challenged oppressive laws and policies. And more on that in just a bit. From the community gatherings in June to the three-day forum, the three-day Roma LGBTQI forum in July, we created platforms for dialogue, support, and strategic planning. And for the Roma queer movie screening in June, we celebrated our culture and identity, strengthened community binds. And throughout June to August, our gatherings continued to grow, providing mutual support and refining our strategies faced in the ongoing oppression of the Hungarian government. One of our significant achievements was establishing the first Queers for Palestine chapter in Budapest, primarily led by queer immigrants of color. Despite legal obstacle, governmental suppression, and initial reluctance from Romani queer activists to align themselves with an issue they initially deemed as too internationalist and beyond the scope of our local struggle, we persevered. The initial hesitation subsided as we engaged in an open dialogue at a large emergency solidarity meeting in which we outlined the parallels between our struggles. We highlighted the similarities of oppression, such as refugees being banned and pro-Palestinian dissent. And and all of that despite the Palestinian diaspora and the significant Palestinian diaspora in Hungary. We also discussed how the government's strong diplomatic ties with the Israeli government contribute to the silencing of pro-Palestinian voices. And through these conversations, we built understanding and solidarity, and we organized the first ever registered pro-Palestinian rally in Budapest, defying legal odds and the government's ban of protests supporting terrorist organization. The rally was attended by more than 1,000 and had heavy media coverage and was a major step at effectively connecting our local struggles with a transnational movement. At Budapest Pride, Romani queer activists stood in solidarity with Queers for Palestine, and our presence was a powerful statement against the government's attempt to silence dissent and marginalize our communities. We made speeches and gave interviews to mainstream media, drawing parallels between various forms of oppression, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia, and linked them to historical contexts such as the state socialist regime in Hungary and it being a beneficiary of US imperialism. This highlighting of an intersectional approach was heavily debated and received endorsement of civil society bodies that challenged the government. Aside from community organizing and solidarity building with our comrades, as part of my fellowship at Háttérr Society, Hungary's leading LGBTQI organizations, I conducted in-depth interviews with European Council policy actors in Brussels, leading to a comprehensive policy document. Rooted in community experiences, it provides actionable recommendations for improving the lives of Romani LGBTQI individuals. We also sent a questionnaire to 92 civil society organizations and public bodies, receiving 41 responses. This data informs our strategies and highlight areas where support is lacking or where interventions are most needed. Moving forward, the policy documents that I started developing on my first day working at Háttérr Society as a paralegal and later lawyer is nearly finished, and now expanded to include other racialized communities in Hungary. The folks in Budapest are continuing their community gatherings and build strong ties with other activist groups. Despite the conditions in which activists function, they still remain committed to their communities and challenging the Hungarian state. And for those interested in understanding more concretely the intersection of queer and Romani oppression, please scan this QR code on the right to get the Zotero link with a comprehensive bibliography of key literature. And for the left, or the right, sorry, feel free to check out Háttérr Society, the oldest and largest LGBTQI grassroots in Hungary, to get more information provided in English on the rapidly changing landscape of the political and legal situation of LGBTQI people in the country. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? First, I want to give glory to God for the opportunity and platform to stand before you. Secondly, I want to thank every other individual who has put aside time to just be present in this room. And mostly I want to thank all those who are joining on Zoom, who are in Uganda. I know it's very late, but they're here to show support. Can you imagine becoming a journalist in a country where human rights are not guaranteed, where your safety and that of your family is at risk, where anytime you could be kidnapped, you could be arrested, or you could disappear? But can you actually imagine living in a world that doesn't actually respect press freedom? My name is Marian Apio, and I'm a Ugandan journalist, a human rights defender, and I'm an investigative journalism student at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. So this summer, I spent 3 months working with the Media Challenge Initiative in Uganda, documenting stories of abuse against journalists. And you might not know, but abuse of journalists in Uganda is a daily occurrence. On a very normal day when a journalist walks into a newsroom, they could just be picked up, like the countless journalists that I spoke to this summer. But this is not just a Ugandan problem. As you can see on that map, press freedom is under attack globally. Countless democracies, very strong democracies, are at the forefront of abusing safety against journalists. The reality in Uganda, though, is that only 94 cases could be documented in a year. That is ironic. If journalists in Uganda face attacks every single day, why are we having only 94 cases the entire year? And these cases are perpetuated by security forces, the police and the army, who, by the end of my presentation, you realize they should be the guarantors of press freedom in my country and around the world. Some of these cases, as of those of the journalists that I spoke to, are of assault, arrests, confiscation of gadgets. How are you expected to do the work then if you don't have the equipment? Today I have the privilege to show you a glimpse of the documentary that I shot. We spent countless hours talking to journalists and giving them a platform to share their stories. And I want to take this chance to thank the bold, brave, courageous journalists that shared their stories, because they don't get to tell their stories.
Uganda has a history of caging press freedom. It has been so since the colonial era.
You write a story and you have all the facts to write. Even when you are still writing the story before it's published anywhere, someone calls you. Why are you writing that story? Drop that story.
In a climate where reporters are routinely threatened and harassed, with some being kidnapped and tortured, journalists are questioning their profession, even as they risk their lives in pursuit of the truth.
I found I was spraying journalists.
There is no guarantee for protection.
You're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to protect my gadget as well. That even when these people are fighting, you're supposed to have my back, that they don't even injure me.
The government is contending that its hard stand is meant to protect journalists.
We are trying to protect your lives. We are telling you there's a danger there. For you insisting you must go where there's a danger. Yes, we shall beat you for your own sake.
I think the security forces come to drive fear into people's hearts.
You bring it for the first.
the space is shrinking.
When you go into the newsroom and you see what we live with practically every day, it's not a nice picture. We're losing it as practitioners. We're losing it as a profession. We're losing it as a country.
Organizations have come up to help build the next generation of journalists, to help them remain steadfast in the profession.
There is so much hope for the future of journalism in young people who are niching out from the mainstream traditional journalism, working on specific thematic areas from gender to climate change.
We have so much power that we just let lie around.
We need journalists to be able to stand together and say enough is enough, and stand to support those who have been abused, to claim compensation, not just for now, but for the future.
Starting with the media houses, we need to be willing to fight for our space, fight for our people, give them the dignity they deserve, give them the pride to work in media and fight for the media space.
So I'm hopeful that journalism is not dead, that journalism may be limping, but it will move forward. All of us have to stand up and defend journalism, because if we don't, democracy will die in darkness.
As I conclude my presentation, I want to share a story with you. But first, will you defend journalism? Will you stand up for press freedom? Because if you don't, like my story, like every other person, every other journalist, you didn't get the chance to see all of them, but all of them are asking you to defend journalism. On the 29th of July, I took that photo. And before I knew it, I was told, you are a criminal. The next thing I know, I was asked by two prison officers to be taken somewhere. I didn't know where I was going. I asked, like any normal person, where are you taking me? And they're like, you need to be interrogated because you're a criminal. For what? For taking a photo. I cried like a baby. I couldn't believe it, because why would you arrest me? What had I done, right? And I remembered the countless stories of the journalists I was documenting. Like James Sakena, for example, who was brutally beaten by the army. And guess what he did? He quit journalism. And then I remembered Aine Mbabazi, a young reporter who had just started doing journalism. And she was beaten up by a gang. Again, my question to you is, why is abuse against journalists so normal? Why is it becoming a normal thing? Why are we accepting it? This is proof that documentation of abuse against journalists and other human rights defenders is vital. That stories like mine and all the others that are being documented across the world are vital. Unlike other journalists, I was very lucky. The Human Rights Center and the Berkeley investigative reporting program gave me a safety net. I was asked to come back to school, and here I am, very safe and sound. But what about the other journalists in my country? The upcoming journalists, the veteran journalists that are doing one thing, documenting the truth. Just because a country has a constitution, it doesn't mean that press freedom is there. Uganda has a very clear constitution. There are laws and policies, but press freedom is not there. And like other parts of the world, we need to stand up and defend journalists. So I want to thank the Media Challenge Initiative for the opportunity to tell this story, the Human Rights Center, IRP, and everyone else in the audience who has come to show their love. I know and I believe that journalism is alive because of brave voices and young people who are standing up for journalism. Thank you very much.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadia. I'm a graduate student here at the law school. And before coming here, I was a human rights advocate from Brazil. So I understand how overwhelming it can be to juggle like daily work while trying to document the shrinking civic spaces. And I really appreciate the work the Human Rights Center fellows have been doing because of that. So as international students from the Global South at an elite institution, many of us feel the need to make the most of the resources that we now have in the platforms, while also staying grounded in the struggles of our communities. So I would like to know, how have you managed this balance of leveraging your position while still advocating for marginalized voices of your regions after the fellowship? Thank you.
Yeah, and community is important. So home is where you make it. I think just being able to accept that you've made a transition, you're here now, and like, if just say, take advantage of the places you are. I believe we are not in places by mistake. Or by accident, and so if you're in a place, it means there's a very good reason why you're in that place. I don't know if I've been able to answer your question.
I'm not sure if it works. I think for me, I'm on the opposite end of on the spectrum when it comes to thinking about this question, because I think for me, I have experienced a very different model of the Global North before moving here. And while that model is very oppressive in its own nature for a lot of people of color, a lot of marginalized immigrants that come in, it is still, for me at least, being Palestinian is a very familiar sort of framework. It's not as messy and hyper-capitalistic as the United States one, especially in the academic environment. I am getting paid to teach students that pay tuition, going directly to fund arms that kill my people. So it is a very strange position to be in. I don't necessarily consider it as privilege, because these are resources being distributed, but not in an equitable way. I don't think it is a privilege to be here, to be at a law school that has made it very clear that they will not divest from a genocide, and are very rampant Zionists. So that is something that I don't contend with easily when I think about my position. I feel a lot of guilt, especially during what's happening right now to my friends and family in Lebanon. And I don't know. I feel like these are tools that we often subvert and use anyway, because that is the position that we are in. But I don't necessarily thank anyone for is on the institutional end, because this is just a small way, a very unmentionably tiny way of making up for all the oppression that our people in the Global South have gone through.
More questions? Let me get this person first.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question has to do with a lot of these human rights issues. We hear the stories, we go out, we show solidarity, we protest, we cry out. We do documentaries, amazing ones like the one Marian presented. Yet it looks like we are doing very little to push the needle. But now that you guys have been on the ground, you've done some groundwork and all of that, I would like to hear from you, are there alternative ways to engage with the situation that would cause a much bigger change? Is there hope? That is the question I want to ask. Is there hope? Because again, we keep hearing these over and over again, and me personally, it just puts me in a place of hopelessness.
Yeah, I can take that one because I think there is hope, and I think that's what my documentary ends with. The hope is in the hands of people like you who have a lot of privilege, a lot of knowledge, a lot of power, a lot of access, a lot of resources, a lot of platforms like social media. And so that's the first thing. Like the mere fact that we are at UC Berkeley, your one post on social media has so much reach that someone probably back home may not necessarily have. I don't know, okay, maybe this is, yeah. And then the second thing is that there is a very clear understanding of what the human rights framework is. The people back home understand their needs, and we just need to empower our communities to remember that they have the power, because they do. They definitely do. And so if each one of us can go back home, even if you don't physically go back, but work with the people back home to give them the knowledge you've gotten from UC Berkeley, give them something. That is the best way we are going to be able to fight for human rights. And so if you're seated here and enjoying your privileges and you're forgetting back home, there is no way our countries, the world is going to get there. And so we need to be the link between these forces that are fighting against human rights and the people who need to benefit from human rights.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
I can come from a bit of a different perspective, I think. I think being someone who is, like, my family does hail from East Africa, but I've never spent, is this on? Okay. Is that okay? Sorry. My family, sorry? Okay. My family is from East Africa, but this was the longest time I've ever spent in the region. And so a lot of the things that I thought I understood about the country, or things I thought I understood about the history, or about customs, or about the institutions, I very quickly learned I was completely wrong about. And I think the main thing that I realized is that as lucky as I am to have access to these resources, to be able to be a part of these institutions and to be able to work in these spaces, I don't believe that it is necessarily the skills I'm learning here that is going to be able to translate into human rights work there. I think that to try and, there was something that I was talking about with my coworkers, because Ethiopians are known for being lazy. It's a horrible stereotype, but we're known for being very lazy people. We're known for not working much. We're known for doing very minimum work. We're known for trying to get away with whatever we can. And when I was talking to my coworkers about this and I was trying to understand why, in my mindset, I was like, oh, it's because, like, for whatever reason, you're content with the way your life is. And they were telling me, no, actually, it's the exact opposite. It's that I know my life is never going to get better. I know that if I'm working in this way, I know that if I'm going to slave away all day to work for this company, I'm going to slave all day to work for this person, I'm not going to gain enough wealth from it for me to be able to grow in the world. And I'm not going to get generational wealth. It's not going to give me the opportunity all the time to go and get an education and then use that education in some way to feed back into my community. I think the way that we're going to learn how, not even learn how, I think our communities understand what human rights are in their framework. I don't think it makes sense for us to try and put our Western framework or ideas of, like, these international human rights treaties onto a community who is living a very different life than we are. And so I mean, I think the hope that I have in human rights and human rights work is understanding that when you're working with communities, they know what's best for them. They don't need you to come in and tell you what things you learned in your political theory course or what, like, research paper you wrote. I mean, they don't need that. That's not going to benefit them in much way. What's most important is to listen to what they need, which they know, and be there for them and try and support them in whatever way you can based off that. But I think that's the main thing I learned when I was over there, is that my framework here is never going to be able to translate, never is a bit of a strong word, is not likely to be able to translate into sustaining human rights in our communities back home. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but.
This question is for Sabrine. Understanding and knowing the polarization in social media landscape today, especially when only very few American companies happen to quite literally control the global social media landscape, what kind of policies do you think would be important to implement that could possibly help with these sort of proprietary obligations that this algorithm that we so-called hear back and forth has to be pushed, like to push a certain narrative, whether that be positive or negative? How exactly do you think possibly would be efficient to regulate that?
I don't know. Sorry, I don't have an answer for that. A lot of the work that we were, I think also going back to me being I just got my BA, I don't have any great research, PhD experience. So when I went there, I was under the framework that I am coming in with my little BA political science Berkeley degree, and I'm gonna help in a system in whatever way that they think is best. And much of my research didn't go into the policy of it. I think looking at the Ethiopian context that we were in, human rights defenders are heavily attacked. They're seen as the enemy to building Ethiopia's empire or to allowing the country to flourish in the way that the government and a lot of people believe it's meant to. And I also think that it's difficult because you're also dealing with a growing economy and a growing population. And as much as I obviously seen the very negative impacts of social media use, it is incredible in so many other ways, where I can right now go on my phone and I can text my cousin who's just chilling, well, they're sleeping now, but who's chilling in Ethiopia. And that's an incredible tool that I otherwise wouldn't have. Imagine during wars, during conflicts where we otherwise would not know what's going on with our family. It's a very difficult thing to try and figure out, because you're taking a tool that is connecting people and educating them and bringing them and trying to level out the playing field of the global south to the global north. But then sorry, let me collect my thought real quick. I think the main thing in Ethiopian context that I can't speak for the rest of the world is trying to figure out what Ethiopia needs to deal with on an Ethiopian level. What we're mainly seeing is that we're not educated, we don't know how to use the internet, and we have these very deep-seated ethnic and religious and regional issues. And we're letting that translate onto the digital landscape because we can do it anonymously, and it can spread fast, and we can get likes and comments, and we can make money off it. And I think, and again, I can't speak to a global context in any shape or form. I'm not qualified, and I'm not really qualified to speak on the Ethiopian context either, but I think that it's most important that we're focusing on the issues within the country that we're seeing explode online. Because you can try and do whatever you want to regulate what people are gonna do online, but the sentiment is still probably gonna exist in real life. And if we're allowing it to perpetuate in real life, but we're trying to keep it from happening online, I feel like there's a disconnect there in really addressing the issue in a sustainable way. I'm sorry, I don't think that really answered your question, but.
Hi, thank you all so much for your presentation. They were all incredible. A question for maybe any of you who want to answer. It looks like all of you, to an extent, were working in complicated, polarized regions with not always democracies, not always freedom of speech. How did that affect you guys as individuals, and how did that affect your planning for the projects that you guys were doing? Were there times when you wanted to do certain things that you couldn't, you chose not to do it? And in a broader context, how do you think about human rights activism, wanting to progress things, wanting to make an impact, but also caring about your safety, your community safety, and the limits of what you can do?
Yeah, and not far from what you shared. I had planned my vacation back home, celebrating my grandmother's 79th birthday. I had a clear plan of what the whole idea of how the fellowship was gonna go. And when it comes to risks, I tend to feel, again, my opinions about working back home are very different because I was born in Uganda, I've grown up there, I've worked in communities. I understand what it means to be there, right? So when I say when you're at UC Berkeley, you have so much power, it is a privilege to be in this institution. So when I think about risk, the fact that I was able to fly out from my country to here in a few days, no journalist gets to do that. It is rare. It is a rare opportunity. So I don't even get to think about my 4 hours in that cell as anything, because James Akena cannot do journalism anymore. If you watch this whole documentary, you probably would cry. Why? Because this is a reality. Like, you're barely paid. You're doing something for free. It's a passion. That's how they tell us when we're learning journalism back home. This is your passion. Do it for the public. But even the public is abusing you. So when I say you're at UC Berkeley and you have so much power, I mean it. Just by everything that is around you. So for me, when I think about risk, I'm like, I was there for 4 hours. It was scary. I cried like a baby. I didn't enjoy my entire vacation. I came back 3 weeks before. But the journalists I interviewed are still back home, right? And so when you have that perspective, you're wondering, okay, do I get to cry? No. I'm on this story. I am still doing it with David. He's right here. I'm still doing the story. That's the only way. And I understand that we have to be safe. We have to take care of ourselves. But I get the talent, the passion, and the opportunity to be here. I'm going to do journalism. That's the only way.
Did anyone else want to weigh in on that particular question? All right. The next commenter is the faculty director, co-faculty director of the Human Rights Center, Professor Eric Stover.
Thanks. We're going up here? Okay, we're going up. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I started nearly 30 years ago, so I've sat through so many of our fellows coming in and reporting. When we began, it was like 4 a year that we would have, maybe 5 or 6, and it's grown so much. So what I want to do at the end here, first of all, I want everyone on the Human Rights Center staff who's here to raise their hand. Come on, we're all here. A round of applause. The reason I say that is at the Human Rights Center, it is a team effort. We all work together. And secondly, I want to ask those who are former Human Rights Fellow alums, will you raise your hands? There we go. Look. And lastly, just to all the fellows this time, what we learn is so important is life begins at the end of your comfort zone, but you went out there and you did the work, and you worked with communities, and that's so important. So another round of applause for all our fellows. And last but not least, I want to recognize this guy here. Alexei has been working on the Human Rights Fellowship Program for how many years now? Are we up 4? But he's done a fantastic job. It's really a lot of work, so big round of applause for him. Thank you.
Well, on that congratulatory and self-congratulatory note, everybody, I think this brings us to the end of the conference.